So we can just blame them for that. Last week we talked about the leadership qualities of Joshua, and this lesson kind of goes along with it in that we want to look at the characteristics that Joseph has, that what made a good character with him. And hopefully we can continue this theme for a couple weeks because our world is so desperately lacking in examples of good character today. When we think about the patriarchs, we probably think of Abraham. He was a man of faith. We think of Isaac, the son of promise, maybe his father Jacob, the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. But when we consider them and when we look at all the patriarchs that are talked about in the Old Testament, more space is devoted to Joseph than the others. Starting from about Genesis chapter 37 to chapter 50 is a lot about Joseph. And if we look at that, there's not a single word of reproof against him. Not one. When we look at others that the scriptures talk about and give accounts of, we see that they are all human and they all have their flaws. And the Bible has never tried to hide or to justify or gloss over the sins of those that we read about within it. We see Abraham, he lied about Sarah being his wife. We see Abraham, when God had promised him Isaac, his son, he doubted that. Jacob tricked Isaac into giving Esau his blessing. Jacob wasn't a really good brother, if we think about it. His brother Esau came to him in time of need, and he took his birthright away from him, took everything he had in that instance. If we look further in the Old Testament, think about Lot. Lot was a righteous man, but he made the mistake for the rest of his family of moving them too close to Sodom and Gomorrah. But again, Lot was described in the Bible as a righteous man. If we look at David, he was called a man after God's own heart. He sinned with Bathsheba, and then he sinned multiple times over trying to cover up that sin that he had committed. Of course, Solomon, the wisest man on earth that has ever lived, was wicked in what he had done and what he and the wives that he brought in did. He sinned. The kings of Israel that we read about, the sins that they committed, they all were human and they all had sin. But when we look at Joseph, we see a person who always lived a life showing great character. And it's worth noting in several more details as to what character traits showed in him. And again, over the next couple of weeks, I want to look at some more people found in the scriptures that we can look to that exhibit great character, qualities that we need to have. But Joseph always showed nobility in his character and purity of heart in his life. It's someone that had many obstacles to overcome. And later in his life, when he had overcome them, he showed great amounts of character, being generous and fairness as a ruler, and what he did for his family. He didn't return evil for evil for them. All of these make him a perfect example of the type of character that we need to look to. So let's think about and review and get Joseph on our mind before us, who he was. Well, he was the son of Canaan, of Jacob, one of the 12 tribes of Israel, one of the 12 sons of Israel. Joseph was hated by his brothers, and we'll spend a lot of time in Genesis chapter 37 and around there this morning. So if you have a Bible, you might want to mark it to there because we'll be hitting a lot of these scriptures. But he was not well liked at all by his brothers, and we'll look at this more in a couple points. But in Genesis 37 and verse 2, we see him reporting back to Jacob and gave him a report about what was going on. In Genesis 37 and verse 2, this is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. So here's this undoubtedly being seen by his brothers and those that he was with as a little tattletale. That may not be the word that's hip and trendy today. I should ask Stephen what it was. Maybe we'd call it being a rat. He's going and giving a report back to his dad about what was going on. But whatever we could interpret here, we can see that Joseph wasn't involved in whatever it was. And he wasn't going to cover up or try to hide it for those who were. But favoritism, he was favored by his father. And surely that helped lead to the animosity that his brothers felt for him and against him. In Genesis 37, beginning in verse 3, I'm sure we've seen families in our lives that have been upset and bothered because one child was favored greatly over the others. But in Genesis 37 and verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also, he made a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. That's strong wording, hated him. One child can do no wrong and the other one seemingly could do no right. And this caused problems. Of course, if we think about it, not that this justifies it, but Jacob was favored by his mother, and Esau was favored by his father. It probably, the family circle continued there and probably aided in that. But whether it was justified or not for Jacob loving Joseph more by his actions, that caused animosity between him and his brothers. And none of this helped his brothers' love for him. In his dreams, Joseph had dreams that we will later look at today that came true that helped make this matter worse. I don't know if any of us were placed in his brother's position, if we would probably not feel any different than them because of somebody coming and telling us this. It would probably start harboring some resentment toward that person. Genesis chapter 37, beginning in verse 5. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There were 7 binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." And his brother said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down before me." So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Here's this little tattletale that's running around telling our dad what's going on, keeping our father informed of what we're doing behind his back. And now he's having these dreams about us, and even greater, he's telling them to us. What does he think? We're going to fall down and worship him? Big chance of that, isn't there? Well, we know later what happens in this story. But Joseph and his dreams and his father's favoritism led his brothers to selling him into slavery. They wanted to kill him. And don't worry, we're not going to read all of that, just a few verses out of it to exemplify the points. But they wanted to kill him. Reuben intended to set him free, but they ended up selling him into slavery. Beginning in verse 19 of Genesis chapter 37. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and they shall say, 'Some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, Shed no blood, but cast him into the pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So here he comes. Nobody's around him. Let's sneak up on him and let's get him and let's kill him and let's put an end to this right now. Of course, the plan didn't work. He was spared death by Judah's idea, which was to sell him into slavery. Reuben didn't get a chance to do his plan because he was sold into slavery before that happened. Beginning in verse 26, so Judah said to his brother, What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother in our flesh. And his brothers listened. So let's not kill him, and we'll do him a great favor. We'll sell him into slavery, and then whatever happens to him won't be upon us. But all through this, in his youth, Joseph's character didn't falter. He remained faithful. And as a young person, we see that Joseph was always faithful to his father. And unlike many younger folks, that's the time when we tend to rebel against our parents to win approval from those of our peers. A wonderful example to the young right here. Joseph remained faithful to his father's rule, and he was always faithful to him. Even with that dream of them bowing down before him, which they later will, he remained faithful to his father. In verse 13, they're going back to Genesis 13 and verse 37. And Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said to him, Here am I. Does that not remind us of Isaiah? Who can the Lord find faithful? Here am I, send me. I need you to go do something. Take care of this for me. Joseph said, Here I am. I will go. He seemed eager and willing to obey his father. He obviously did what he wanted him to, because that's when his brothers caught him and put him into the pit and then sold him into slavery. But Joseph was following the wishes of his father. And how much pain and suffering could or should be avoided in our world today if those of us who were once young would listen to our parents when they tried to instruct us on things. And I know my parents tried, and I didn't listen to their instruction a few times, and it probably would have worked out better if I would have listened from the get-go. We might think such ill treatment on Joseph, followed by the separation from country and his kin and his family and the life that he had known, would have instilled bitterness and hopelessness in such a young man. And many in our society would look at all this and say, well, look at he's a product of his environment. That's an excuse for him to live in a sinful manner and do wrong because of all this against him, all that's been stacked against him. His father, with his favoritism, caused this issue, and his brothers hated him, and they did all this to him. Well, we should look around, and we'd see him on the morning news about the crimes that he's involved in, and we see these young kids getting out and getting involved in things that they have no business even dreaming of. It reminds me of Noah, when the Lord saw the mind of man was on evil continually. You must stay awake late at night, dreaming up the sin to get involved in. And if we look at Joseph, wouldn't he be the perfect example of someone that lived in that circumstance? Well, all this has happened to him, but his character shows that it doesn't have to be that way. He shines in spite of all of those things that happened to him. Also, being at home without his parents. Being away from home, without his parents. Look at what goes on when young people, as he just walked out the door, I'll talk about it, goes on at college when they go away. drive around to Oxford, or no family person in their right mind would want to go to whatever the chosen city for spring break is because of all the debauchery that is going on around them. The young people are away from their home. They're cutting loose for the first time. No one would want to be in a hotel room where spring break is happening, would you? But even though Joseph was sold into slavery, away from his home, away from his family, when he had an opportunity to sin, and there are people that have that mindset when they go on vacation. Nobody's going to know me when I'm here. I'll never see these people again. I can live however I want to. Joseph was away from everyone that knew him, but he still remained faithful. And his story doesn't end when he's sold into slavery. It just begins. So let's look at Joseph as his life and as a slave in Egypt. And we talk about a person being down on their luck and coming into hard times. Well, I don't believe we could find one that had any more hard times than Joseph. He's now in a strange land where no one knows him. He is in there not as a citizen, but as a slave. It's not like he's going to get back to his home anytime soon, or that word will get back to his father as to what he is involved in. He is in trouble, but he still perseveres. He becomes, as a slave, an overseer in Potiphar's house. He was blessed by God because of his character, and Joseph then finds favor in Potiphar's eyes, already showing the type of character that he has in this situation. In Genesis chapter 39, and we looked at Joshua last week, and how many times did he talk about God will be with you if you have good courage, strong courage. Well, that's what Joseph is exhibiting here as an overseer of Potiphar's house, beginning in verse 1 of Genesis 39. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. And then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. So it was from the time that he had made him overseer of his house, and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had expected from the bread which he ate. Now, or except the bread that he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. This young man, he proved to be industrious and trustworthy even as a slave. Joseph was a hard worker, not because he had to be, but because that was his character. And Potiphar noticed this, and he put him over everything in his house. Why else would he put a slave in that position? Over everything. He didn't know anything except what he ate. That's how much Joseph had authority in his home. So many lessons could be taken from this one passage alone. First off, with him just being sold as a slave, he remained true to God, and God was with him because of that. And I'm afraid that when downturns happen in our lives, or negative things happen, what do we start doing? Typically, we start pulling away from God. We start turning, how could God let this happen to me? Well, Joseph's been sold into slavery. Is he questioning God? No, he's living right in front of him. That's not the case with Joseph. Joseph made the best of this situation that he was in, and God blessed him and he blessed Potiphar, and Potiphar could see God working through him. And look at how much he trusted this slave. I don't know that if I owned another person and it was in that relationship with them, I don't know that I would put them in a situation where they were over me. Potiphar didn't know anything that he had going on in his house. He could have poisoned him or killed him or something. I don't think I would trust someone like that in my home. But Potiphar did because of the way that Joseph was living in front of him. And when we go back to Potiphar, we can see that the Lord was with Joseph. And how do you think Potiphar was able to see this? Do we think that Joseph had to stand around him and shout and yell and tell him over and over again that God was with him? Like we were talking about last week, the fellow that ran for city council, and every time that he spoke, he kept telling people how he had a servant's heart. Do you think Joseph did that? That Joseph was going around, I have a servant's heart. I'm here to serve you. No, he didn't have to say a word. He didn't have to say anything. It was what he did. Potiphar saw God was with Joseph by the way that Joseph lived his life in front of him and how he conducted himself and how he handled his affairs. Just like the rest of the world can see God living within us if we're living how we're supposed to. If we're not, then the world's not going to see God living with us because he isn't. But Potiphar saw that. Now, as we concluded that reading, we finished with one little part of that verse, and that was Joseph was a handsome man as well. Maybe a blessing or a curse, but in his instance, it caused him to be tempted by Potiphar's wife. And she tried time and time again to seduce him. And imagine that what this temptation would be upon someone in the position of a slave. I don't know that we can even begin to think about that. He was ripped from his family, by his family, taken to this strange, faraway land, and then here is this wife of this very powerful man, his master, doing this to him. Oh, what a situation that would be in, to be in that. But he resisted that out of faithfulness, not only to Potiphar, but to God. Beginning in verse 7, we won't read all that's on the screen, but in Genesis chapter 39 and verse 7, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? If we took this and we shifted this to our human reasoning, oh, how easily we would think, well, this Potiphar's my master. He owes this to me. Now, how many people cheat their employer because they feel their employer owes them more than they really do? Joseph could have also felt, well, God's turned his back on me. Look at this situation that I am in. Look at how terrible my life is. That gives me a license to sin, to do whatever will give me just a little bit of pleasure while I'm on this earth. Again, many lessons could be taken from this passage as well, this part of the chapter as well, because Joseph demonstrates his character when being confronted with sin. What did he do? Did he think about the pleasure that would bring him in the moment? No, he thought about how his actions would affect others. Look at what this is going to do to my master. He's put me in charge of all of this, and I'm going to betray him? Do we think about that when we're being tempted about how my actions are going to affect someone else? We should, because no one is an island. Everything that we do is going to have an effect on someone else. What I do would affect my wife and Stephen and mom and dad and the congregation here. All of that's going to come together. And Joseph's looking at that and he's thinking about that. But he also thinks about how he's going to sin against God. Not only am I going to bother my master, but I'm going to be tempted, and I'm going to be tempted with a sin that's going to sin against God. And this is something that no doubt we don't read anywhere where Joseph wasn't a normal red-blooded male. No doubt that this would have been pleasurable for him, but what did he do? He didn't stick around to see just how close he could come to this without sinning. No, he left, literally ran away with his garment in her hand. Again, think about our human mindset. When we're being tempted by something, we may even know, of course we know, that it's leading to somewhere sinful, but it's not sin yet. So I'm going to get just as close to it as I can get before it becomes sin, and then I'll get away from it. Joseph didn't wait for that last moment, did he? Let's just see how far we can take this. I know it's leading to sin, but it's not sinful yet, so we're just going to keep pushing this along, aren't we? No, he fled the situation. He fled the scene. If we're thinking that we're so strong that we can get so close to this sin, but we're going to jump out of the way before sin gets us, guess what? We're already in sin. We need to get away from it before it gets us. Instead of giving in to her advances, he runs. And then, of course, she lies, and because of being spiteful against him, accuses him wrongfully. That then angers her husband, and it results in Joseph being put into prison. But we still, through all of that, we don't see Joseph abandoning his character and his morals. And this shows a lesson that we should learn from this as well. This shows that always doing right, it doesn't necessarily produce positive results. Now, that's not a line from a motivational speech, is it? Joseph did everything that was right, and he still ended up in prison. But we need to remember, as we think about that, who's in charge of this world? Whose realm is this world? Well, it belongs to Satan, doesn't it? So Joseph, if we look at his life, he sees himself going from a slave to now a prisoner, from bad to worse, if that's possible. And none of this was caused by anything that he had done. None of this was his fault. And while I would never want to find myself in prison in our world today, it would be like a day spa compared to what the prisons were back then and what he was enduring. But as with the slave, when Joseph gets into the prison, he becomes an overseer in Pharaoh's prison. Joseph is still being blessed by God, and that leads to Joseph having favor by the keeper of the prison. And we won't read all those passages, but this is where they'll be taken from that are up there. And this place that he is in, he is now in charge of other prisoners with complete trust. That shows the kind of character that he is showing in front of others. In Genesis chapter 39 and beginning in verse 21, Genesis 39 and beginning in verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Joseph's character is so evident that the keeper of the prison didn't pay any attention. If Joseph's on top of it, then I'm not going to worry about it. And that's what he did. Just like his relationship with Potiphar. Here's this young man, and he's such a fine young man, I don't have to worry about anything in my house. As long as I've got food to eat, it's all going to be going okay. And remember those themes from last week that we talked about with Joshua. When he was told about his courage, have that strong courage and obey the Lord. And when he did that, the Lord would bless him. Well, even though Joseph wasn't in what we would consider a good situation, how could you say Joseph is being blessed? He's a slave. He gets lied about, becomes a prisoner. That's not a good situation. He still continues to serve God, and God is still watching over him. And as with everything in his life up to this point, he's prospering in it because of that. It was God who was with him and who was blessing him, because Joseph never turned his back on him. And we see him in Genesis chapter 40 beginning to interpret dreams in there. Genesis chapter 40 and beginning in verse 1. It came to pass after these things that the butler and baker of the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief butler and the chief baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them. So they were in custody for a while. Then the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, had a dream, both of them, each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream with its own interpretation. And Joseph came in to them in the morning and looked at them and saw that they were sad. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in the custody of his Lord's house, saying, "Why do you look so sad today?" And after he interprets the dreams of the butler and the baker, Joseph still gives credit to where it belongs, and that is acknowledging God as the interpreter, the one that has the ability to do that. In chapter 40 and verse 8, and they said to him, "We each have had a dream, and there is no interpreter of it." So Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please." If we think about our society today, how quickly everyone is worried about getting credit for something. Something, whether they may have done it or not, they'll take credit for it because they want to get the glory. And here's Joseph in this position, a prisoner. He's still making sure that God gets the glory. And the dreams are fulfilled, both of them. And Joseph was forgotten about. That was the one thing that he asked. When you get back into Pharaoh's house, remember me. No, he's left in prison for 2 full years, beginning in verse 20 of Genesis chapter 40. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. What Joseph must have been thinking. Everything that he does is right. Yet he never makes any headway, does he? That's how we would see it. He takes a couple steps forward, and then he takes 10 or 20 backwards. And that's how it feels sometimes, isn't it? We're trying to get ahead, but everything that life throws at us knocks us back. Well, Joseph had been going in reverse for miles, caused by circumstances beyond his control, but he never lets it change his moral character. We're going to end it here this morning and pick up with Joseph tonight, Lord willing, and look at some more of his character and the qualities and the morals that he showed in trying times and the wisdom that he showed in that. I see him standing up, so I was going to remind Carl that he was leading the invitation song. I'm not sure how scriptural that is to have one song leader for the first few songs and then another one for the evening ones, but Carl's going to fill in for Stephen since he had to leave early. But as we take time to think about the condition of our soul as we sing this song, if there's things in our lives that we need to change, let's do so now while we have the opportunity as we stand and sing.
Sing chorus after the last verse. Chorus after the last verse.